So picture this, it's 1914. The world is exploding into the First World War. You got the trenches on the Western Front, the German and British battleships fighting in the North Sea. We all know that stuff. But down in the south, on the Adriatic Sea, that stretch of water between Italy and Croatia, there is a completely different kind of war happening. It involves the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, usually when you think of Austria-Hungary, I bet the last thing you think about is cutting-edge naval aviation. But here is the thing. They actually had one of the most interesting, eclectic and frankly wild air forces of the entire war. They were flying wooden boats with wings, fighting duels in the sky and pulling off rescues that sounds like something out of a movie. So, grab your coffee. I want to tell you the story of the Blue Eagles and the vanished fleet. First, we have to understand the Adriatic theater. The Adriatic Sea is basically a long, narrow alleyway. Austria-Hungary is trapped at the top and the Allies have blockaded the bottom. The Empire's big battleships are too expensive to risk, so the Admiralty decided they will use the fleet at being strategy. So they are just sitting in the harbor at Pola. So who do they send out to fight? The submarines, the small surface boats, and most importantly for our story, the flying boats. Now, when I say flying boats, I mean it literally. These were not planes with floats attached. The fuselage was a boat hull made of mahogany and ash wood. The Austro-Hungarian Navy, the K.u.K Kriegsmarine, saw the potential of aircraft for its operations. However, the Army's air service, the K.u.K Luftfahrttruppen, controlled most aviation resources. The Navy wanted its own independent air arm, specifically for its needs in the Adriatic Sea, as the war at sea had different demands than the war on land. An independent air arm would mean aircraft and pilots trained specifically for maritime tasks. But it took some time, as it was not until August 1916 that the Naval Air Service was officially established. It was first called the K.u.K Seefliegerkorps, or Imperial and Royal Naval Air Service. A year later, in 1917, it was renamed to the K.u.K Seefliegerkorps. The main goal of the Seefliegerkorps was clear: to support the Navy's ships in the Adriatic. This meant, above all, reconnaissance for spotting enemy ships and movements. Naval officers were chosen to become the first pilots. They received their initial training at places like Neustadt in Lower Austria and were then assigned to battleships or to new air stations being set up along the coast. The workhorse of the Seefliegerkorps was this machine called the Loner E and the Loner L. And flying this thing was an experience. Imagine sitting in an open wooden bathtub, thousands of feet in the air, there is no glass canopy, you are exposed to the freezing wind whipping off the Alps, and directly behind your head is a massive screaming Austro-Daimler engine. These engines didn't have mufflers. The vibration was so bad it would shake your soul out of your body. And because the propeller was behind you, this is what they call the pusher configuration. If anything fell out of your pocket, it would fly back and shed the propeller. But here is the thing about the Loner L. It was actually a brilliant design. It was so good that early in the war, an Austrian pilot had engine trouble and had to emergency land near an Italian naval base. The Italians captured it, looked it over, and basically said, "Wow, this is way better than our stuff." So they took it to the Mach factory, reverse engineered it in about a month, and started building their own version called the Mach 11. So for a huge chunk of the war, the Austro-Hungarians and the Italians were dogfighting in basically the exact same airplane, just with different paint jobs. It's like you're fighting your evil twin. Other important aircraft included seaplanes from Hansa Brandenburg like the C-1 model, which, though also used over land, had versions or influenced designs for naval reconnaissance and light bombing. But the real legend of this air force wasn't just the machines, it was the people. And you cannot talk about them without talking about Godfried von Banfield. This guy is the ultimate character. They called him the Eagle of Trieste. He was a baron, a naval officer, and of Irish descent, because the Austro-Hungarian Empire was this crazy mix of nationalities. Banfield flew a loner that was painted blue, not camouflage blue, but a distinctive "I am here and come and get me" blue. They called it the Bluebird or the Blue Eagle. There is this amazing story from 1917. Banfield is up in the air and he gets into a dogfight with the legendary Italian ace named Francesco Baracca. Side note, Baracca is the guy whose horse emblem eventually became the Ferrari logo. And I mean, yes, that Ferrari. So Banfield and Baracca are circling each other, trying to get a kill shot, but they are both too good. Neither can get the upper hand. Eventually, they both run low on fuel. They pull up alongside each other, realize the stalemate, salute each other, and fly home. It sounds like a myth, but that was the vibe of the Adriatic Air War. It was brutal, sure, but there was this weird, lingering code of chivalry. Banfield was officially created with 9 aerial victories, with several other claims unconfirmed. To achieve this in relatively slow flying boats, often against potentially faster enemy aircraft, speaks volumes about his flying skills. But it wasn't all salutes and Ferraris. In 1916, these guys pulled off something that changed naval warfare forever. 2 Austro-Hungarian loner flying boats were on the patrol off the coast of Montenegro. The water in the Adriatic is incredibly clear, so from the air they spotted a dark shape underwater. It was a French submarine, the Foucault. The pilots, K.u.K and Zelezny, dived down. They dropped depth charges. They score a direct hit. The sub is hit. The captain thought that they entered a minefield, so they had to surface. The French sailors scramble out onto the deck as the submarine starts sinking beneath them. Now, this is usually the part where the pilots fly away and let the ocean do the rest. But K.u.K and Zelezny didn't do that. They landed their fragile wooden planes on the open sea. They taxied over to the sinking sub and they told the French sailors to swim over and hold onto the wings. Can you imagine that? You are just being bombed, your ship is gone, and now you are clinging to the pontoon of the enemy plane that just sank you, while the pilot waits for a torpedo boat to come pick you up. This was the first time in history an aircraft sank a submarine at sea. And every single French sailor survived because the Austro-Hungarian pilots decided to be lifeguards that day. Of course, not everything was a success. We have to talk about the Knoller program. The Empire was desperate for more planes, so they commissioned a professor named Richard Knoller to design a new scout plane. On paper, it looked great. In reality, it was a death trap. The wings were structurally unstable. If you turned too hard, or flew too fast, or just looked at it wrong, the wings would literally warp and collapse. The pilots called them the flying coffins. The bureaucracy was so messed up that they kept building them even after they knew they didn't work. Hundreds of these things were built, delivered to the front, and immediately shoved into sheds or used as expensive firewood because no one dared to fly them. Okay, one last story, and this one is a heist. It's 1918. The war is ending. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is collapsing. Morale is, let's say it's low. At a naval base on the island of Lucino, there is a loner flying boat, serial number L127, sitting fully fueled on the ramp. In the middle of the night, 2 sailors, just regular enlisted guys of Italian descent, sneak out to the plane. They have probably watched the pilots do the startup process hundreds of times, so they crank the engine, jump in, and somehow manage to take off in the dark. They fly these stolen military aircraft all the way across the Adriatic Sea to Italy. They land near Fano, where they are immediately captured by Italian troops on an armored train. And the craziest part, that specific plane, the stolen L-127, still around. The Italians kept it. You can see it today in a museum near Rome. It is one of the only survivors of this war era. To understand the K.u.K. Seefliegerkorps' place in history, it's useful to briefly compare it to other naval air arms of World War I. Britain's Royal Naval Air Service was vastly larger and more technologically advanced. At its peak, they had around 55,000 personnel and 3,000 aircraft. They pioneered carrier strike operations, strategic bombing raids, and anti-submarine patrols on massive scale. Germany's naval arm, the Marinefliegerabteilung, also grew to a considerable size, with about 16,000 members by the war's end. It was particularly known for its Zeppelin airships used for reconnaissance and bombing over the North Sea, as well as its seaplane operations. Italy, Austro-Hungary's main opponent in the Adriatic, also developed its naval air capabilities. The Sezioni
idrovolanti.
Crucially, Italy had significantly larger overall aircraft production capacity than Austria-Hungary. The K.u.K. Seefliegerkorps operated on a much smaller scale than these major players. However, its concentrated focus on the Adriatic theater allowed it to have a notable local impact, particularly against Italian forces. This disparity in size and resources shows that naval aviation development during World War I was very uneven, heavily dependent on a nation's industrial strength, its global strategy, and the priority given to this new form of warfare. The Austro-Hungarian Naval Air Service was a clear example of a smaller power making the most of limited means in a specific geographically contained conflict. And that is the legacy of the Austro-Hungarian Naval Service. When the war ended in 1918, the empire dissolved almost overnight. The emperor abdicated, the navy was handed over to the winners. The planes were scrapped, burned, or seized. But for years, this ragtag group of multi-ethnic pilots flying wooden boats over a sparkling blue sea managed to hold their own against the major power. They sank submarines, they fought duels, and they left us with some incredible stories. Thank you for joining me for another video. I hope you find it interesting. If you made it all the way to the end, feel free to like the video, leave a comment, or subscribe to my channel. I also want to mention that I'm working on a World War I turn-by-turn strategic game covering the battles of Isonzo. It runs directly in your browser and it is completely free to play. If you like to try it out, you will find the link in the description. And as always, thank you for being here.